To think that it's been over a year since the video that started it all. One post by someone who I've since had a falling out with, it caused me to look into Akuma Miko's misdeeds. This, in turn, led me down paths that I would never have imagined I'd wind up taking. And I'm back for a third and hopefully final time, because quite a bit has happened since my first video on Akuma Miko. But I'm not just covering new developments, I'm also going to be re-examining stuff I brought up in my previous video on Akuma Miko, as well as stuff I overlooked that, quite frankly, I should have covered, because I want this to be as comprehensive as possible. I would say you'll be wondering why Akuma Miko hasn't been covered by other people, but the thing is, in the time that happened since I released my first video, a few people have actually talked about her. Two other VTubers have talked about drama she got involved in, and one person outside of the VTuber sphere actually made a video on her as well, which I actually helped with a bit. So I'm actually not the only person who's talking about her anymore. I've also burned the bridge with two people who consider themselves victims of Akuma's in the past for unrelated reasons I'll cover in a future video. But that's not to say that things have only changed for me. Akuma has had quite a lot happen to her in the time since. I'm gonna cover that in the video obviously, but if you were hoping she'd learned from the error of her ways and had managed to stay out of controversy, you are gonna be disappointed, that's all I'll say. Now look, there are some cases where she was on the receiving end of harassment she didn't deserve, like from Draco Starscale or Sunwitch. But two wrongs don't make a right. Just because they harassed her does not mean that she is automatically cleared of any wrongdoing she did. I'd also like to point out that she has been on the receiving end of some really foul stuff from some other people, and not only did said stuff happen without my involvement, but I actually did call it out in my video on Sunwitch. But as you'll see by the end of this video, Akuma is not innocent either. Although it's worth noting that Akuma's reputation has kind of started to cause problems for her. One example of this came from earlier this year in the form of the implosion of Rhapsodia. Two now former members of this group, Annie-san, I hope I pronounced that right, and Kate Fishing, put together a Google Doc covering aspects that people criticized the group for, and not only did Akuma Miko get brought up as one of the main points of criticism, but in another segment, she was also brought up because she basically dragged the group into drama with a now graduated VTuber named Jay Shiro, which I'm not going to go into only because I forgot to take screenshots before the posts were deleted. Now, Akuma does give a brief explanation as to some of the controversy she was in, but it comes across as her downplaying the stuff she actually did because she's never publicly addressed what she's been accused of. Funny story! While I was writing this script, Akuma joined another group, or agency. I'm actually not really sure what to classify them as, and if you're familiar with the drama, you'll understand why I'm saying this, by the name of Lucky Entertainment, and then left. However, from what I could gather, while there was one thing that kind of reminded me of some drama involving another group Akuma was a part of, as far as I can tell, this happened in spite of the fact that she was a member, not because of it. I will go into it later. I'm just putting this here in advance so people don't get the wrong idea. I also have one or two things that she's done that no one has talked about. But as usual, don't harass anyone I bring up in this video. And before I forget, warning, this video contains discussion of the following topics: suicide, self-harm, and child sexual abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. So, with that out of the way, I just realized I have no actual idea where to start. You know, I guess I could start with one of the most well-known things about Akuma, that she's a prominent doxer.
And I'm just gonna admit this here, right now. Hi. I'm gonna introduce myself as the bitch who doxed Tara.
Akuma has doxed multiple people and will also gather as much personal info as possible to dox people with. One example that comes to mind is someone who goes by Destiny. No, not the one you're thinking of, a different person by the same name. But this one's special because Akuma has outright admitted to doxing Destiny, and I even have the audio clip to go with it, as well as a clip of her voice to prove it's actually her.
And I'm just gonna admit this here, right now. Hi. I'm gonna introduce myself as the bitch who doxed Tara. Having an iPhone is rad, because now I can verbally shitpost. Meow meow balls. Meow meow balls. Meow meow balls. Meow meow balls. Meow meow balls.
This is also an example of Akuma being transphobic, or at least trying to be, since I think Akuma mispronounces Destiny's dead name, and refers to them as Terra. You know, like the Final Fantasy VI character.
Now, I'm going to attach this. Of course, Caden's going to make the post, but this is my personal thing about this. You notice how Cassidy, Miko, whatever the hell she goes by, says my dead name wrong every time. This is the correct pronunciation of it.
So yeah, you can't get away from activewear like a bad smell. Is he sweating it? Before I make any more amazing jokes, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Tara Mooney, and this is the only channel.
Now, she claims that she likes this person and watches them. Same pronunciation, same spelling. Need I say more?
Another example involves Akuma doxing an ex of hers named Logan. I know this is Akuma's account because I actually have spoken with someone who's been in some DMs with said account, and they go by the name Sad Boy Samurai. They've confirmed that Akuma was the other person in those DMs. They actually have quite the history with Akuma, and I will go more into depth about said history as I go through the video. Akuma has, in total, claimed to dox 8 people. I've seen at least one person claim it was as high as 12. Either way, doxing people is one of her favorite hobbies. She's also doxed 2 other people connected to Sad Boy, someone named Dickwitch, yes, that is the name she goes by, and his cousin Tom. She has also been more than happy to use the threat of doxing to silence people she doesn't like this example here involving someone named Lucy. Keep in mind that she was willing to threaten someone with doxing in your mind for later in this video. It will come up later. In fact, I suspect that doxing is kind of a default action for her. I say this because of a situation involving someone who goes by Bendy. Bendy's ex had been treating them really badly, and Akuma decided to send Bendy a dox of said ex, despite the fact that Bendy had not asked for such a thing. There is actually one case where she is on the record as paying another person in cryptocurrency to gather someone's dox. The person Akuma is trying to get the dox of in these screenshots goes by Paradox Cat. Now, according to the thread I got this from, there are actually a lot of cases of Akuma doxing people, but they didn't include them because of just how many there were. And there is actually one more case of Akuma doxing someone that I have spoken to, but I'll bring that up later in the video. But for now, let's move on to how Akuma is pretty bigoted.
Really called him a tard and he got triggered because of it. And I was like, dude, I'm also autistic. You can shut the fuck up. It's not that hard of a word. See, look, I'm a fucking retard. Not that fucking hard, dude. Not that hard. Be fucking self-aware. Duh.
Akuma has been caught using the N-word. Now, it would be one thing if she was rapping along to a song and it was so caught up in the moment that she said it by accident. No, she said it on purpose. English is her first language, so this isn't like one of those clips of the Japanese Hololive talent saying the N-word without knowing about the meaning of the word. And it's not like she was pulling that Dark Viper AU where she was really in the moment and accidentally said it while quoting GTA. I would play the clip, but apparently he's quite trigger happy with copyright striking that clip. But if you've seen the clip I'm talking about, you already know what I'm referring to. But you might have noticed that I titled the segment Bigotry as opposed to just racism. That's because Akuma, as I already mentioned earlier, is also pretty transphobic. One example of this is stuff she directed towards NuppyZ, who is a, let's say, somewhat controversial Twitter user who posts about VTubers. They also happen to be trans, and yet on several occasions, Akuma has opted to misgender them. Alright, I know some of you rolled your eyes the second I mentioned NuppyZ's name, so if you want a more serious example, here's one that involves her fiance, a YouTuber named The Last Distress. See, Akuma put out a Google Drive containing Discord screenshots between Distress and someone named Ryoji, a trans man who happens to be Distress's ex. If you listen to Akuma and Distress, Ryoji is an abusive ex of Distress's. However, the drive Akuma linked, which she has now restricted access to for reasons I'll get to in a second, paints a very different picture. For one thing, it contains an uncensored photo of someone, presumably Ryoji, committing self-harm. Now, it would be one thing if she was including a screenshot of Ryoji sending the image, but censored it as a way to show how said ex was harassing her boyfriend. But no, she just includes the image without any context. Funny story about that. When I was first looking into Akuma, I saved a copy of her drive of evidence when I made my first video, but I excised the offending image. However, I recently figured I should at least go back and try and take a photo proving there was an image there. I bring this up because I found that I couldn't access the drive, which suggests that Akuma realizes how much she fucked up by including that image. At best, this proves that Akuma is extremely reckless and negligent, and at worst, she's outright malicious. And second, in the DMs, Ryoji accuses Distress of committing sexual assault, which Distress never denies. So, in the absolute best case scenario, Akuma is unintentionally undermining her fiancé's defense. This is one case where I'd argue that, quite frankly, she should have just kept quiet. And speaking of spreading lies by Akuma, let's talk how she has a habit of defaming and slandering people. Akuma is more than happy to defame someone if they get on her bad side, even if they don't actually do anything to her. One example involves another VTuber named Niara. On September 22nd of this year, some rather damning screenshots were posted on Twitter. Fuck you, Elon, no one's calling it X. However, there was one big problem. The screenshots, which were supposedly showing some really damning stuff Niara had done, were fake. Niara actually had to address this, and this isn't just my opinion or Niara's. Kiwi Farms of all sites actually had to remove the screenshots because of how fake they were. There's actually a second set of posts that show people on Kiwi Farms acknowledging that the images are fake. As you can probably tell by the fact that I'm including this in this segment, one of the people who shared these images was Akuma Miko. While I don't have a direct screenshot of her sharing the post, I do happen to have some posts by other people either citing her as a source or calling her out in replies. But this isn't the only example of her attacking Niara with no actual evidence. When asked if Niara was the one who tried to quote-unquote destroy Kirsch, Akuma said yes, except the person also called Niara a pedophile. This is in spite of the fact that no actual evidence of her grooming kids has ever come out. All Niara has actually done is advocate for trans kids. You can certainly argue if there's a better way for her to do so, but that is not grooming. Also, last time I checked, it was Anna Valence, not Niara, who tried to quote-unquote destroy Hirsch. But this is actually pretty funny because this is a radical change from Akuma's stance in the past. Because not only has Akuma previously claimed to have been a trans ally, even though she was caught following some rather transphobic accounts, as you can see right here. And yes, you are seeing that she was following minors despite having minors DNI in her bio. At one point, Akuma even claimed to be trans herself. But here's another example, namely one Riedel64. Akuma has made some rather damning accusations against Riedel64. But here's the thing, as far as I can tell, she never actually provided any evidence of the stuff she accused Riedel of doing to her. If anything, it seems like she is relying on the fact that a bunch of other people have accused Riedel of bad things to give her accusations credibility. I actually looked into a good amount of those accusations, and well, let's just say that I'm going to be making quite a few callouts when I get around to looking at all the stuff Riedel is accused of, mainly because there are a lot of false allegations that have been made against her. I won't be going into most of these in this video because this isn't a video about Riedel, although I will tackle one or two later or when it's somewhat relevant. Now, as for why Akuma actually hates Riedel, it's actually because Riedel didn't help Akuma in 2022 when Akuma wanted her to share a post containing some allegations. At the time, Riedel had a bigger follower account than Akuma, although Akuma's was in the 4-digit range, so she still would have gotten a decent amount of reach without Riedel's help. However, because it was just a twit longer that, at the time, was attached to a thread that did not contain any evidence, Riedel did not feel comfortable promoting that claim. Making accusations without giving any evidence. Looks like Akuma hasn't changed at all. Oh, and unlike other cases, Akuma can't simply prove me wrong by just pulling up the twitlonger on screen. Since twitlongers are text only, you literally cannot add photos to them. Plus, as I mentioned, Akuma had a follower count of roughly 5,000. It would have still gotten her a decent audience without Riedel sharing it. But you might have noticed that I specifically said there was no evidence at the time. Well, Akuma did add some, but it was after Akuma initially DM'd Riedel. And well, with the evidence Akuma did add, she unintentionally gave Riedel a completely valid excuse not to want to share the thread, since the screenshots Akuma added at a later date included one of Akuma's exes sharing the story of Riedel being a victim of child sexual abuse. The fact that Akuma included this proves she only cares about making other people suffer, not bringing others to justice. She is an extremely reckless bitch. I don't care what Riedel did to you, there is no justification for sharing something like this. This also makes your accusation of Riedel sharing your abuse photos, which, as I said before, you never have provided any evidence of her doing, come across as a case of projection. Oh, and if you want more proof Akuma doesn't care about justice, she outright doxed Riedel. This is also why I'm not including the allegations from Yumi and Sim in this video, because they did something very similar to Riedel, and I opted to cut ties with them because of that. But anyways, let's get back to Akuma. One other example that was particularly damaging to the reputation of the victim in question involves an artist named Bunya. See, because of an art trade that went wrong, Bunya wound up drawing a model for Akuma for free. Yes, you heard that correctly, Akuma got a free live 2D model. However, Akuma then tried to make merch off of said model without having the commercial rights. Bunya called Akuma out over this. Unfortunately for Bunya, rather than just apologizing and asking, hey, how much do you want for the rights? Akuma got someone who, at the time, had quite a bit of credibility to cover the story from her perspective, Catliente. Catliente never reached out to Bunya for her side of the story, and Akuma's word was taken at face value. Even though, if you actually read Akuma's Google Doc, it actually shows Bunya was in the right, since the one thing that would prove Bunya as a liar, namely a screenshot of Bunya giving Akuma commercial rights, is nowhere to be found. So yeah, Catliente, if you're watching this, you have a video you need to delete, and you also owe Bunya a public apology. So, I was originally going to move on to the next part of this segment, but on a whim, I decided to ask Bunya how much she would have wanted in return for the commercial rights. And well, as it turns out, Akuma actually did promise to pay Bunya. Specifically, she promised to pay her $800. Catliente, you should be ashamed of yourself. And lastly, let's get to Sad Boy Samurai's story. There is one thing I'll get to related to him later in the video, but for now, I'll just recount his experience with Akuma. Akuma and Sad Boy were in an on and off relationship for about 3.5 years, from 2018 to early spring 2022. During that period, Akuma cheated on him multiple times and also abused him by gaslighting, stonewalling, love bombing, forcing a trauma bond with him, putting a wedge between Sad Boy and his family and friends, and even going as far as isolating him away from them. She physically harmed him multiple times, punched him repeatedly, slapped him across the face over and over, even going as far as biting him until she broke skin and drew blood, and purposely triggered and pushed him to the point of forcing him into a psychotic episode to fit whatever narrative she wanted at that moment. Sad Boy is diagnosed with ADHD, intermediate exposed disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or the last one came after he was with her. Akuma knew this, and despite this, encouraged him not to take his mood-stabilizing medications and pushed him to go off of them altogether, thus resulting in him having episodes, which, again, she took advantage of, like he stated previously. Yep, She also crippled him financially for a very long time in multiple ways, constantly blowing his money, refusing to get a stable job, picking fights and creating arguments while he was at work, thus preventing him from keeping stable hours and income. It even resulted in him losing several jobs for that reason. This caused him to lose his apartment at some point also. Even after the quote-unquote public breakup in late 2021, Akuma was still using his PayPal account, and at one point, Akuma stole his ID. There was also a time before the breakup where she stole his debit card and used it to buy gifts for her friends without consulting him at first and getting permission to do so. Akuma would also constantly try and make Sad Boy help her dox people she didn't like that she knew he was friends with. If she would press him for information on people she did not like, and he was in fear for himself and his family and friends if he did not give in to her demands. She was still in contact and messaging him from alt accounts, text now numbers, and view of her previously main accounts up until May 2022, despite the breakup and arrest happening in October 2021, although lying to her friends and family saying otherwise. She also snuck out and met with him in person several instances during this time frame, including on both Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2021. Now, it's also worth noting that Akuma is on the record as having stolen several Switch games from Sad Boy, and, well, according to Dickwitch, she was even willing to fake her death to frame him for murder. I wish I was making this up. In fact, that detail was actually why I disregarded this story during the very first time I looked into Miko, because it was just too ridiculous. Now, while there isn't a ton of evidence, he does have a few witnesses who collaborate his story, one of which being the aforementioned Dickwitch. Now, Akuma has accused Sad Boy of being abusive a few times, but as you might have noticed, she never provides any evidence or witnesses to back her claims up. But defaming and harassing people aren't the only ways that Akuma will hurt others. Let's talk about how she's harassed people.
So I saw on Twitter you said one time that all V-tweeters should be rounded up and shot in that back of the head. Do you still stand by that statement, or like? Because I was a little concerned.
I fully and 100% stand by that statement.
Nice.
Akuma also has a habit of harassing people she doesn't like. For example, someone named Lisa told Destiny about what Akuma was saying behind their back. Akuma's response was to raid Lisa's server, which is actually against Discord's terms of service. As you can see here, Akuma was really dedicated to harassing Lisa and, once again, dead-naming Destiny. In fact, Akuma was even willing to learn how to perform a DDoS attack to harass Lisa. I'd like to remind you that this all happened because Lisa decided to warn Destiny about what Akuma was saying about them behind their back. Akuma could have just easily, just stopped talking trash about Destiny. Akuma in particular actually has a huge hate boner for Destiny. There are countless posts bullying Destiny, who also goes by Mikuni, and even using Destiny's parents' address as a profile picture. And this while she's calling out other people for doxing, which, as I've shown, is a lie. However, I put this under harassment because of how intense this gets. She has also talked about where Destiny works, and has actually said how she wants Destiny dead. She's also constantly body shamed Destiny, and in fact, even went out of her way to message one of Destiny's family members, who happens to be a minor. There's also multiple cases where Akuma has used an alt account named Yaru Hearts to harass people. I know this is her account because she admitted that it's hers. And the last photo is actually relevant because it was suspended because she was telling people to kill themselves with it. While I have no reason to believe Elon directly had a role, if he did, it was one of the few things he's done for Twitter that I will objectively say is good. And you know what? If he actually wants to claim credit, I have no problem with giving it to him in this case. She has also, on at least one or two occasions, outright decided to just do this on main. So, now that I'm done talking about Akuma harassing people, let's talk about how she's a huge hypocrite, shall we? Now, let's talk about something Akuma is a master of, hypocrisy. A while back, Akuma made a post calling out 3 people who have been accused of pedophilia. Now, I do not disagree with her calling out Draco, since I did make an entire video on him earlier this year after someone falsely accused me of being him. I can't really comment on Pandora's case. I'm assuming that the Pandora she's referring to is Pandora Berengaria, as I have not looked super deep into it, although from what I have read, it doesn't look good. although keep her in mind for later. As for Neo, while the allegations against him do not look good, I am skeptical of them because all the evidence comes from investigations that were led by Ollie Rain, who I have explained why I don't trust him in previous videos of mine. However, this comes off as kind of hypocritical since up until relatively recently, Akuma was actually following one Usagi Calamari. You might remember him if you watched my video on him. If you didn't, or you've never heard of him before, Usagi is the latest identity of the neo-Nazi pedophile known as Melia the Maid, who had some extremely damning screenshots of DMs leaked that I wish I had when I made my video. Well, Akuma isn't following Usagi anymore. Usagi claims that it's because Lucky EN, a group agency, whatever, I'll explain my confusion later on, was part of up until really recently, I will talk about them later, forced her to unfollow him. While I can't say I trust Usagi, it is worth noting that after Akuma updated her username to reflect the fact that she was a member of Lucky EN, which was around the time those really damning messages about Usagi dropped, she wasn't following Usagi, so make of that what you will. And I already know what Akuma and her defenders are gonna say. She follows a ton of people. How would she know what Usagi did? And you know what? You're right. I mean, it's not like there are screenshots of one of her now former mods telling her about Usagi and she disregards said concerns, which I'm showing on screen right now. For context, at the time, Usagi was harassing someone who was mutuals with Akuma, Suki of the Sea, who I actually happen to be mutuals with. In fact, if I am understanding these correctly, Akuma is saying she won't block Melia because Yumi Pill, the person who posted the screenshot that exposed Melia as a pedophile, has her blocked. There is one other bit of hypocrisy about the post she made, considering someone she's worked with, which I'll get to in a minute or two. Also, you know how I said to keep Pandora's name in your mind for later? Well, it turns out that Pandora has rebranded from Pandora Berengaria to Pandora Demonic, yet despite the fact that Akuma called her out, she's been caught following Pandora on Blue Sky. There's also all the stuff involving her friend Celestial VT, who was not only running in a Discord server where minors were interacting with adult content creators, but was also distributing her own nudes while she was underage. I made an entire video calling her out over that and some other stuff if you want more info. So it looks like Akuma doesn't actually have a problem with pedophiles as long as she personally hasn't had a bad experience with them. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one more person Akuma willingly associates with, Floofy Kisses. Floofy falsely accused Riedel of grooming her in a video she has since unlisted, mainly because the video's screenshots actually undermine her case. Most notably being that the DMs Floofy shows in the video actually show Riedel explicitly rejecting Floofy, and the tone of her DMs comes across as, I don't want anything to do with you. But that's not all. It turns out that Floofy was running a Discord that had no age verification and had minors in it, and yes, exactly what you think happened. She was making posts like this while she was 17 and talking to 13-year-olds. There's quite a bit more on Floofy that I could mention, such as the fact that she had the aforementioned Pandora in her Discord server, but at this point, I'm actually seriously considering making an entire video on her, so I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I don't think Akuma has any right to say anything like this, considering the people she actually keeps as company. Now, based on what I've shown and said so far, you might be wondering why Akuma Miko hasn't been added to the VTuber Blacklist. I mean, I don't know if I would say she is as bad as the unholy four of Draco, Ethicamine, Falter, and Melia the Maid, and I can definitely say she's nowhere near as bad as the one person I'm not naming because I do not feel comfortable talking about them. Yet, despite the fact that she's done stuff that has put other VTubers like Whimsies and Shanzo on there, she is strangely absent from the blacklist. However, while they haven't outright said they won't put her on, the blacklist has actually really dragged their feet regarding Miko. Now, I can understand that the people who run the list do have lives outside of Twitter, and I imagine that the list does get a lot of submissions that vary in quality. And to be fair, as I stated, they haven't outright said, no, we're not putting her on, nor have they outright dismissed the allegations. But quite frankly, you'd think that after a certain point, they'd make looking into her their top priority, if only to get people to stop bugging them about her. The claim that they have a limited team also kind of rubs me the wrong way, since the VT Blacklist have said they have a total of 7 members, yet they managed to put out threads faster than the VTuber Blacklist has. I mean, the only explanation I could think of that would really make sense for them dragging their feet would be if there was some kind of conflict of interest, like, oh, say, Miko being part of the blacklist, but that's ridiculous, and there's no way that would actually, yeah, let's talk about how the VTuber Blacklist has utterly failed Akuma's victims. So, if you've been following this channel, you are aware that I've called out the VTuber Blacklist over quite a few things. If this somehow happens to be the first video of mine that you've watched, let me catch you up to speed. I've become really cynical towards the VTuber Blacklist, and as such, I basically decided to start a project where I'd look into most of the entries the Blacklist has already covered, as well as VTubers whose misdeeds are serious enough that they should be on the Blacklist. So far, I have found that all of the VTubers I have re-examined on and that were on the Blacklist did belong, but in a few cases, they were strangely missing evidence. I would have actually called them out for a name who, even by the Blacklist's own logic, they wrongfully put on the list in September, but given that they deleted his entry, I had to scrap that plan. I'll come back to this one in a minute or two. Yes, I am actually kind of annoyed I had to scrap that plan. But the more concerning issue is the people I've covered that should be on there. Demon Lord Lucien and Celestial VT, both of whom I've made videos on their misdeeds, have done absolutely abhorrent things, yet the VTuber Blacklist strangely does not have entries on them. And Akuma Miko is one of the names that many people, myself included, would say should be on the VTuber Blacklist. But she isn't. And that's because, well, the only explanation that makes sense is she's actually a member of the team. Or at least she was at one point. Now, I can understand the Blacklist not wanting to name every member, since if, oh, say, Draco Starscale found out, he'd start to harass them, or that's what I would say if this was anyone else. But as I showed earlier, Akuma herself has admitted she has access to the Blacklist server. So why is the Blacklist not adding her to the list? Why not just kick her off the team and add her? Well, if they did, she'd likely be able to present evidence that she was a member, and as such, she could claim that they faked whatever they put her on there for. Plus, given that she's had bad experiences at the hands of Draco Starscale and apparently Vulture 15, admitting she was a member could give them an easy way to discredit the list. Now, you might be wondering, okay, she had bad experiences with some of the people on the Blacklist, but other than that, what's the problem? Well, aside from the fact that she could have easily vetoed any attempt to put an entry on her, or her friend Celestial VT and one other person I'll bring up in a second, there's also one now deleted entry whose presence only really makes sense if she had a hand in putting it up there. I'm talking about the same one I said I'd get back to, a now graduated whale VTuber named Toastify. You might recognize the name if you're a fan of False ID, since he made 2 videos highlighting some of his antics. Now, I am not going to try and defend Toastify's actions, but the thing is, at most, he should have only been the subject of some jokes for a week max, and everyone should have just moved on afterwards. None of the stuff he was accused of was super serious. But strangely enough, up until a few months ago, he was listed on the VTuber Blacklist for reasons that, as you're seeing right now, are actually really petty. This was the entry I was going to debunk last September, and I had a script that I was like 75% of the way done with before the Blacklist deleted his entry. Well, the entry isn't up anymore, as I mentioned. I was able to screenshot 2 of the posts on the thread containing his entry. Said things being follow baiting, not good, but not really worth blacklisting someone for, and emote art theft. However, they're not accusing him of tracing emotes. It's the fact that he used emotes that were apparently traced. Except, well, the thing is, I actually reached out to one of the mods for the Discord server for Toastify's new identity, and they confirmed what I suspected, namely Toastify commissioned someone else to make those emotes, so there is no actual plagiarism here. And while I don't have a screenshot, they basically do the same thing with the accusation of character art theft, which, once again, Toastify is not an artist, so this isn't tracing, and he wasn't doing commissions, so he wasn't scamming people. As for the use of AI art, this is actually a funny one. Toastify has said he'll own up to it, and False ISD did include evidence of this in his video. But the VTuber Blacklist did not include any evidence of it whatsoever. But how do I know it's connected to Akuma Miko, you might be wondering? Well, not only did Toastify himself say he hated her, and he thinks she's part of the blacklist as well, but I actually found a fair number of posts Akuma made where she was attacking him, which on its own wouldn't be much, but when combined with everything I've shown so far is just too much of a coincidence. So yeah, I think the most likely explanation for why Toastify was on the blacklist was that Akuma waited until he found himself in a different controversy, thanks False ISD, and then Akuma used him as an excuse to get him put on the blacklist. It would explain why, even though they originally listed dishonest use of AI art, something Akuma is also guilty of, by the way, yet once again, as I said before, they don't have her on there for something they clearly view as an unforgivable sin. They didn't include any actual evidence. But that's not the only entry I suspect she had a hand in. Let's talk about a name I brought up before, Shu Ivy, also known as Riedel64. Riedel is on the blacklist, but something her entry always struck me as odd. Mainly because, well, after doing some digging, I found that at least half the accusations were either false or had very questionable evidence. Originally, it had 4 accusations against her. However, one of them was from the VTuber Saisei Tunes, or as I like to call him, Florida VTuber, for reasons you'll understand why in a second, accused her of grooming him, was deleted after someone who coincidentally happens to use the same Twitter account that I use, proposed a community note that pointed out that Saisei's own tweets contradicted the accusations. And in fact, it was later revealed that not only was Florida VTuber the one who was sexually manipulating Riedel, but since he is living in Florida, he was actually breaking the law, since it turns out falsely accusing someone of grooming is a crime in Florida. Plus, I have screenshots that actually show Saisei outright admitting that he was thinking of Riedel when he was being intimate with his current girlfriend, so I'm inclined to say that what actually happened was she rejected him, he never got over this, and he falsely accused her of grooming him in retaliation. There was also allegations that Riedel was not respecting boundaries from someone named Seppi the Seal. However, since Seppi said the stuff of Riedel did happen in VC, I did the logical thing and I asked them about this. They outright admitted that they had no actual evidence, nor did they give me any witnesses who could back them up. But when I spoke to Riedel, on the other hand, she actually gave me a statement from a witness which revealed that it was actually Seppi that wasn't respecting Riedel's boundaries. In other words, Seppi was projecting to cover their own ass. Yet the VTuber Blacklist didn't even bother reaching out to Riedel to get her side of the story. In fact, they've explicitly made it impossible for Riedel to present evidence to debunk allegations against her. There is other stuff on there, and there's also a lot of other stuff Riedel has been accused of by other people that isn't on there, but I'll get to that in a future video. The flimsiness of the accusations I highlighted wouldn't make sense to include for a list that's trying to follow strict standards, but it would make sense for someone who's trying to keep someone they hate on there to put on there, and as I established earlier in the video, Akuma hates Riedel. But on November 6th, something very unusual happened. On that day, the VTuber Blacklist posted a video which was shortly deleted, but fortunately, other people were able to record it and someone posted it to Reddit, which I'll play right now. You are not hearing things, by the way. There are beeps in that video. Said beeps are Morse code, and according to a few Redditors, it's roughly said the following. We are being blackmailed into silence via threats by a person we aren't being allowed to list for our safety. You know who it is because they were never listed. Which, assuming this is a legitimate cry for help and not something to try and throw people off, would make sense if it's Akuma Miko, since the wording means it can't be Draco, Epic Mind, or Falter, and well, as I've shown already, Akuma isn't afraid of blackmailing people. However, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. If it's real, then the blacklist sucks because they chose to protect themselves over delivering justice to Akuma Miko's victims, and as such, now they're paying the price. On the other hand, if they're just doing this for attention, then it comes across as really insensitive. Either way, the blacklist should feel ashamed of themselves. But I know what you're thinking. How do I know Akuma would be willing to use someone's personal info as a way to keep them silent? Well, in Riedel's case specifically, as I mentioned, she has been accused of quite a bit of stuff. Yet, up until relatively recently, she's never put out a statement to defend herself. Why is that? Because Akuma has Riedel's docs. I don't have a screenshot of Akuma explicitly saying, if you try and defend yourself, I'll dox you, but I do happen to know that Akuma worked with someone to get Riedel's docs. As I showed earlier, she was more than willing to post Riedel's face without her consent. But why do I say this? Well, Akuma was working with a name who, if you've been following this channel, you might recognize. Demon Lord Lucien. If you don't know that name, he's Riedel's ex who was a VTuber until I exposed him for committing revenge porn and grooming minors with an ASMR channel he ran. He wound up deleting said channel, or rather, deleting the videos on the channel after I called him out, but I actually have a recording of that. Now, some other people were able to connect the dots between Akuma and Lucien in recordings of phone calls that I'll play now.
I sent it to Miko. Miko has your information. Or at least that piece of information. Because you said, because apparently the address that I have is not your address. Which I only found out. Yeah, and I agree. Thinking in hindsight, yeah, it's fucking stupid, and I agree. And that's my bad.
I can't fucking believe this. You know what?
Okay.
You know what, Devin? I'm sorry for getting mad at you, but it's the fact that my mother and brother were involved in this shit. This is why I'm very upset.
And you have every right to be upset.
If you had all killed my mother, I would have never forgiven you all.
That's okay. You have every right. And I didn't know that your family would end up getting involved. That was not my intention.
How are you going to say that's not your intention when you still have the information? You gave it to people. You shared that around. Don't you know how dangerous that fucking is?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, because I know Devin would have put a stop to it. I know that. But it's mainly the fact that you all did this. That's what gets to me.
And your brother involved, but that was not my intention. It happened, obviously. And yeah.
It's the fact that you're so monotone and you're not even sorry. That's what gets to me.
I'm just very, but when I'm in a situation like this, I can get very monotone. That's not because I'm not sorry or because, like, I'm literally just monotonous because I'm just, like, dead inside and I, frankly, like, I don't know what else you want me to say. That's literally all I have to say.
I honestly am. I'm honestly just genuinely fucking.
You can be upset at my tone of voice. I'm sorry that I'm not sobbing and in tears.
Are you kidding me? It's the fact that you all did that. Devin, I'm excluding you out of this, and James, I'm excluding you out of this, but it's the fact that you guys are the problem here. Do you guys not understand what you guys have done? Imagine if something did happen. Imagine if something did happen, and then...
I'm very relieved that nothing did happen, and I'm very grateful for that, because that could have been very bad, not just, like, for everyone, but for you especially.
I literally was told that the cops were going to be called on my birthday and were going to be sent to my own mother.
I'm sorry, called on your birthday?
Called on my fucking birthday. Do you all not understand the damage that this has occurred?
When was your birthday?
The 16th.
It was on the 16th.
But I have one thing that no one else has. A recording of Akuma herself admitting to working with Lucien.
So what exactly happened? Is there tangible proof of this? And if so, can you send it my way? Because I haven't been in contact with him since over the summer, and I just find it really fucked up that he's trying to find a way to blame me when I had nothing to do with any of the shit that he caused. All I wanted was Raydell's real info to give to the FBI. It was not posted anywhere, nothing like that.
Recording consent laws don't actually apply here because it was only one person recording themselves. And I don't even need to show Akuma making the threat because, as I showed earlier, she was more than willing to make the same threat to someone else. If she was willing to make a threat like this against someone, why wouldn't she make the same threat against Riedel? Especially since she's already showed Riedel's face without permission, as I showed earlier. In fact, as I record this, I'm actually starting to question what the point of the blacklist is. I've never heard a big name like Iron Mouse or Shoto claim that they turned down a collab with someone because that person was on the blacklist. Draco Starscale, Falter 15, Epic Mind, and Melia the Maid are all still active despite being blacklisted. So before, I would have at least accepted that they were warning people about bad VTubers, like the VT Blacklist or VT Awareness accounts do. But as I've shown, someone was able to use the list to ruin the life of someone she hates. So at this point, I'd actually argue the blacklist should be disbanded, but we have deviated from the main topic of the video. So let's talk about how, in Akuma's eyes, she's the only person who matters.
General, before the day is done, I will have you at the end of my blade. Enforce your surrender.
If there's one thing I've learned about Akuma Miko, it's that she's incredibly selfish and petty. An example of the former involves the Nakama clan. This was a VTuber group she was part of. While the Twitter account is still up, it's been dead for a few years. Now, at the time I made my first video, I didn't know much about them, so I will admit that most of the stuff I included was just speculation. However, recently, someone from the group reached out to me and I got some answers as to what it was. At the time, I thought it was a group Akuma formed for the sake of having people worshiping her, but in reality, it was a separate VTuber group that Akuma basically performed a hostile takeover of. She did so gradually by forcing out people who would oppose her. Now, admittedly, the person who reached out to me didn't give any evidence, but then I remembered a folder of screenshots containing testimony from other members of the Nakama clan, which, after doing some cross-reference, did line up with this person's testimony, which I'm showing on screen right now. I also found proof that she was actually bringing minors into the group, which, well, this is a problem since there were actually content creators who made adult content that were part of the Nakama clan. Yeah. Again, Akuma is not beating the reckless accusations, so I am very much inclined to believe them. Or, if you want an example I've covered before, let's talk about how she botched a plan that, had it worked, would have gotten Draco Starscale to leave the internet. Specifically, this involves a friend of mine named Atozi. Now, Atozi was a member of a group called Hellcast. They were basically VTubing Predator poachers. Hellcast had set up a server where the goal was to get Draco to confess to what he had done. Draco was claiming that he had amnesia of what he had done, and attempts to determine if he had amnesia by Hellcast were inconclusive. The plan was to get Draco to apologize to the victims on the grounds that just because you don't remember, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. With the apology, combined with the amount of evidence, it would make sense that at least some of the stuff Draco is accused of did happen. However, here's the thing. Akuma basically derailed the plan because she couldn't control herself. See, the thing is, because Akuma had a bad experience with Draco in the past, another member of Hellcast, Devin, had a toes add Akuma to the server so she could give him a piece of her mind. Akuma was actually cooperative at first and did as Atoz instructed, but when Draco didn't even notice her message, which I'd like to add Draco was under no obligation to do so, Akuma lost it and lashed out at Atoz despite the fact that this was not Atoz's idea. Atoz even pointed out that they had no way of forcing Draco to read Akuma's message. Now, rather than apologize, Akuma basically refused to take any responsibility whatsoever and was able to not only get Atoz kicked out of Hellcast, but even convinced Ollie Rain, the head of Hellcast, to have Hellcast go after Atoz. Plus, most of the other members of Hellcast took Akuma's side. Akuma also proceeded to launch harassment campaigns against Atoz, and Atoz almost took her own life as a result of this. Fortunately, Hellcast imploded before that could happen. In fact, Ollie's main account has since been suspended. I'm not entirely sure why. Although I have found another account that I'm inclined to believe belongs to Ollie that is still up, but it's been abandoned. Now, we have something that I originally wasn't going to talk about, but after thinking it over and reading up on it, I've changed my mind. We have Akuma's role in Lucky EN. If you don't know what this is, VTubing Explained made a whole video going over a Google Doc detailing the collapse of said organization. Before you make any assumptions, no, Akuma was not the reason the group collapsed. I do agree with the consensus that it's the fault of the manager, Raging Bull. It would have imploded regardless of if Akuma had been a member. But what I'm instead focusing on is the second part of the document. Now, there were two groups in regards to the talents of Lucky EN. The first group, who is otherwise not relevant, consisted of talents who opted to leave the group, or the agency, let's just say the organization. The second group, who the document identifies as the Defenders, is the group Akuma was a part of. The Defenders wanted to make Lucky EN work by just removing Raging Bull. Now, this in and of itself is fine, but the problem is that Akuma proceeded to make things worse. See, Starcat asked someone by the name of Dawn of Everything, a Twitter user who was involved with the group, although not necessarily a member, to do some investigating for her. However, Starcat would later make a now deleted vague post that Akuma later told her to clarify. Akuma would claim that Dawn was threatening Starcat, but from what I can tell, Dawn was just asking for clarification, and Dawn later clarified that Starcat had explicitly asked him to look into this. I do believe Dawn of Everything's side of the story simply because Akuma does not have a very reliable track record, and she is willing to lie about stuff like this if it benefits her. Plus, DMs between Dawn and Starcat exist that actually back his side of the story up. Yet, ironically, Akuma would make a much more direct threat towards Saturn Senshi, who's the author of the doc that I'm using. I don't like Saturn Senshi, but she did not deserve any of this, and like Dawn of Everything, her story is consistent. Although I will admit that I have no idea who Leo Flareborn is, so your guess as to why Akuma made the threat in a reply to one of his posts is as good as mine. Now, before we get to the last segment, I actually have an apology that I need to make. To all those who were affected by the last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm sorry I did not bring it up in my previous videos. The only reason I didn't bring it up at the time was because I genuinely did not know about it. If I had known, I would have absolutely included it. Hopefully you'll consider me taking the time to talk about it this time to be more than enough to make up for that mistake of mine, because it's time to talk about what Akuma Miko did to Tuan.
Are you all right, Colonel?
Yeah, I'm fine. Except, it's a terrible day for rain.
What do you mean? It's not raining.
Yes, it is.
This is a particularly horrific example of Akuma slandering someone, and, well, you'll understand why I'm not just putting it in the segment about slander and defamation by the time I'm done with this. See, this involves someone named Tuan, who's the cousin of the aforementioned sad boy Samurai. If this was a better world, I would have spoken to Tuan and put his story in the segment about how Akuma defames and slanders people, or in the segment on harassment, depending on what he told me from our interview. However, that isn't what happened here, because I could not speak to him for a reason I'm about to explain. See, Tuan made one mistake. He unknowingly flirted with a minor. However, when he did in fact find out that said person was a minor, he apologized, walked away, and never contacted said person again. Now, Tuan was from Vietnam and came over to the States when he was very young, but he still knew better. If this was where the story ended, I wouldn't even be bringing this up. But as you can tell by the fact that it's in this video, that isn't where it ended, because Akuma used this as an excuse to slander him as a pedophile. She would not only add him to multiple group chats, but she'd even go out of her way to harass him in real life. For an example of the latter, Tuan routinely attended a convention called Flower City Comic-Con, and one time, Akuma even tried to get security to kick him out by lying, claiming that he was harassing her. All of this to ruin the convention for him, and conventions were kind of a safe space for him. Akuma's group chats that she added Tuan to were filled with her and other people, all with the goal of making him miserable. They'd call him names, be rude, and do other stuff to make him upset. I don't have access to Tuan's account, so unfortunately I cannot show you those group chats. And blocking those accounts did nothing, since Akuma and her friends would just create new accounts. Eventually, it got too much for Tuan. He took his own life. Tuan once told Dick Witch that if he ever passed away, it was because of Akuma Miko making him decide to end his life. The harassment she caused him was too much. He couldn't do anything without her harassing him. Now, there are some DMs involving Sad Boy, and Akuma where he's laughing at Tuan's death, but the thing is, he now regrets the comments he made in those DMs. Also, people have different ways of coping with loss. If dark humor is what helps someone cope with loss, so be it. Akuma, on the other hand, isn't trying to cope. She's just being sadistic and laughing at the fact that she caused someone to take their own life. But you might be wondering, why did Akuma never face justice for this if there was so much evidence? Well, it's because of Tuan's family. See, if you don't know, suicide is a very taboo subject in Asian families, and because of this, his family won't look into what caused it, even though people have told them that Akuma is the reason why Tuan is no longer among the living. His family has refused to do anything, even though, by all accounts, if I understand correctly, there would be more than enough evidence to charge Akuma with involuntary manslaughter. This, in particular, makes the fact that the VTuber Blacklist hasn't put Akuma on their list go from a gross case of negligence to an absolutely unforgivable sin. If any of the members of said blacklist are watching this, all I have to say is that you should be permanently shamed off the internet, and you should be ashamed of your failure. You have failed everyone, and I don't have anything else to say. So you know what? Let's just wrap this up.
In all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
You know, I'm really not sure how I should feel now that we've come to the end of this video, since on one hand, Akuma actually indirectly caused me to meet some people I now consider really good friends of mine, who I probably would not have met otherwise. On the other hand, you know what, actually, I don't owe her any thanks. I really hope this is the last time I have to talk about Akuma Miko as the main subject of a video. If it turns out that she did some stuff that's even more serious than any of the things I've brought up in this video, then maybe I'll reconsider that stance, but for now, I'm done talking about Akuma. If she's watching this, which I get the feeling that she is, just leave. Not just the VTubing sphere. Leave the internet and never come back. You've shown that you cannot and will not become a better person, and at this point, I'm not even sure if you could do anything to redeem yourself. Quite frankly, you should be behind bars for some of the stuff you've done. To everyone who's enabled Akuma's behavior, I have one question for you. Was it really worth it in light of everything I've talked about in this video? But for everyone else, Akuma's victims, the people who supported me while making this, and everyone who watched this video, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. I'm Andreas Rebel, and I'll see you on my next assignment. Later.